A lot going on this week. I don't even know where to begin. I guess I'll begin with the Supreme Court argument this week over the abortion issue. The Supreme Court, for those of you who have been awake, is considering, frankly, whether to overturn the Roe versus Wade decision, which essentially legalized abortion throughout the entire 9 months of pregnancy, abortion on demand. And now the Supreme Court is considering a challenge to that ruling through a Mississippi law that prohibits in large measure abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy. Judicial Watch filed an amicus brief. Many amicus briefs were filed, as you might imagine, asking the court to overturn Roe versus Wade. You know, in our view, is, first of all, the rule of law should prevail, the Constitution should prevail, and the Constitution doesn't mention abortion. And this is essentially a police power that the states have, that in past history, states have been allowed to regulate abortion and to balance the right to life of the unborn human being versus the alleged liberty interests of the pregnant mother. And the Roe versus Wade decision blew all that up. And in my view, and the view of Judicial Watch and the view of many others, the Supreme Court should right the constitutional wrong and take a step back from acting as a super legislative body and restore the federalist principle that the states have a right to regulate abortion and allow the states to take steps forward, because not all states will do this, but many states will, to start to protect in more aggressive ways the rights and the humanity of unborn human beings. Judicial Watch wrote in its amicus brief, far from creating a national consensus, Roe threw the states into a 48-year contentious legal battle. Even some abortion advocates, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is the deceased Supreme Court Justice, eschew the injudicious method of federalizing abortion as short-circuiting a naturally evolving jurisprudence under state laws. As federal and state judges attempt to apply this court's precedents, which are kind of all over the place, a national landscape of inconsistent, inconclusive, untenable rules have emerged. As a national policy, abortion jurisprudence is, in a word, a mess. Stubbornly holding on to an unconstitutional precedent will never have a positive outcome. It is time to return abortion policy to the states where it belongs and where the democratic processes can effectively work. And as I noted in our press release related to the decision or the oral argument this week, states must be able to defend life, and a disastrous Roe decision has upended our constitutional order. The Supreme Court has a chance to right a constitutional wrong that will allow the states to step in and begin to protect unborn human life. So I don't know how the decision is going to go. I encourage you to listen to or read the oral argument. I think we can probably provide a link to the Supreme Court website. There should be at least a transcript of the oral argument. The justices, I think there's a majority of the justices that will uphold this law. And I guess the question is there a majority that will overturn Roe versus Wade in its entirety? I'm not sure if that's the case. I suspect it will be at least 5-4 in that regard. Chief Justice Roberts, per usual, is trying to walk a middle ground here and seemed upset in some ways that he was being even asked to consider this issue. So we'll see how it turns out. I've often joked, and many have often joked, that in order for the abortion on demand decision, which is one of the worst decisions in the history of the Supreme Court, to be overturned, that Republicans will have to appoint 9 justices, and it will still be 5-4. So it's going to be a close-run thing. What struck me as president of Judicial Watch was the intemperate remarks of Obama appointee Sonia Sotomayor, who is a Supreme Court Justice, who talked about the stench of the decision-making process if the court overturns Roe versus Wade, because evidently we're not allowed to overturn decisions she likes, but we can overturn decisions she doesn't like. and she's essentially attacking the ethics of her colleagues on the Supreme Court in open court. It's a remarkable thing to see, and kind of sad to see and outrageous to see. But it shows you that the rule of law for these pro-abortion fanatics, including Sotomayor, who is a fanatic on the court in this area, everything gets tossed aside. Judicial temperament, judicial ethics, the rule of law, constitutional government, the idea that we protect the vulnerable in our society. And one of the things we didn't mention in our amicus brief, in our friend of court brief, that's worth mentioning, of course I don't think they asked about this at the Supreme Court, is what has Roe wrought besides the deaths of millions of unborn human beings. Is it's created, as Judicial Watch has taken the leadership in exposing a market funded with your tax dollars for the fetal body parts, organs, heads, livers, thymuses, things like that, of them to engage in Frankenstein-like scientific research. Humanized mice research, Judicial Watch has exposed. So this abortion regime obviously is destroying our next generation, but it's also creating this barbarism in our scientific community, because all of these dead unborn human beings are seen as a resource for scientists who have little grounding in ethics and morality, and for politicians who are willing to spend your money to help them use these unborn human beings in Lord knows what processes related to the development of drugs, or as the FDA has admitted, to ensuring the safety of vaccines. So that was the FDA's response to a recent Judicial Watch disclosure that the FDA was funding fetal organ chop shops. So that's what Roe has wrought. I guess that's kind of hard to say. Roe has wrought, which is not only the deaths of unborn human beings, but this barbarism in the scientific community that I think we'll be regretting for the rest of our history. So I suspect the court will issue its ruling probably the middle of next year, by June or sometime in June. So we'll see. In the meantime, Texas has a law that is still in effect that protects human beings in the sense that unborn human beings with a heartbeat are prohibited from being killed through abortion. And the left is apoplectic over that. I mean, that shows you the extremism of the pro-abortion group that is controlling our media, controlling our government now, and unfortunately has been controlling our judiciary. So hopefully that we're able as a country to move forward to expanding the right to life to include the most vulnerable, the unborn. So we'll see what happens. And God bless Texas for taking additional steps. God bless Mississippi for taking steps to try to protect the right to life. And hopefully Roe, the abomination, will be overturned, and additional states, and maybe even the federal government, can then begin to take steps to protect the right to life of innocent preborn human beings. Just a tremendous find by Judicial Watch. These are documents forced out of the the Department of Health and Human Services on Fauci, the coronavirus, and China. Now, we had been suing for some time about those topics, and they've been giving us documents in a dribbling-like fashion. You may have seen news stories about how the FDA is telling one requester, or one, I guess they may be in court now, that they can only turn over documents at the rate of 500 pages a month, and there are supposedly hundreds of thousands of documents, which would mean it would take 55 years to release the documents. And everyone's saying, well, isn't that outrageous? Well, that's the sort of thing we've been operating under for some time at Judicial Watch. That's the standard now government response, which is a slow roll of release of information. And one of the reasons they said that they needed a slow roll of release of information in this specific group of cases is because Anthony Fauci and his team need to look at every document. So the reason we're getting stonewalled is because Anthony Fauci, in an unusual way, is participating in these FOIA lawsuits. At least that's what the government tells us. So we received, and they're not even giving us 500 pages a month or processing them, because they say they're giving them to you, but what they're actually doing is processing them. And you get some and not others, because others are withheld or parts of them are withheld. So we don't even get everything that they say they're processing. It includes a grant application that appears to describe gain-of-function research involving RNA extractions from bats, experiments on viruses, attempts to develop a chimeric virus, and efforts to genetically manipulate the full-length bat SARS-CoV WIV1 strain molecular clone. We obtained these through a lawsuit that we had filed for documents concerning the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the documents are a shocker in this regard. First up, though, there's an email showing that A, they're hiding stuff from us, and B, reconfirming that this gain-of-function study was highlighted and shared with top leadership of Fauci's agency, even as they were telling us they weren't supporting gain-of-function research. On January 27th, 2020, a top official within Fauci's agency, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, wrote the chief of staff for Fauci, Greg Folkers, a heavily redacted series of emails back and forth. Some background on our support of the EcoHealth Group, Peter Daszak et al., which has been for years among the biggest players in coronavirus work. NIAID, Fauci's agency, has been funding Peter's group for coronavirus work in China for the past 5 years through grant, and then they list a number. Understanding the risk of bat coronavirus emergence. Now, Judicial Watch highlighted that document, highlighted that study, and it was our litigation that helped produce this grant application, and I'll talk about in a little bit, that confirms that gain of function was being supported by Fauci's agency, despite his statements to the contrary under oath. There's now been renewed with specific focus on identity cohorts of people highly exposed to bats in China and work out if they're getting sick from COVID. Collaborators include Wuhan Institute of Virology and Ralph Barrick, who is another person who was allegedly involved in gain of function. He was working out of North Carolina. So they reference some of the studies they've been working, but 2 of the references are redacted. So what are they hiding from the American people is what I want to know. What is Fauci hiding about what he was told about what he was funding as coronavirus broke out? Again, this email is from January of last year. So they were all very nervous about it, it's pretty clear. We also received the application and documents about this, including a notice of an award and the actual grant application. So the notice of award says, the specialists also note that award grantees using highly pathogenic agents may warrant a biocontainment safety facility of BSL-3 or higher. Now, supposedly, the Wuhan Institute was 4. Then the application talks about, obviously, the research involving EcoHealth Alliance in New York City, which was the big vehicle for spending all this money in China. You should know it wasn't just the Wuhan Institute that was benefiting from your tax dollars, however objectionable on gain of function and other type of research in that area. It was other places in China. The U.S. government, the taxpayers, you the taxpayer, you were the silent, not so silent partner with China in these biological experiments, which in my view, and many other expert views, frankly had a biological weapons element potentially. And we're funding it. Wuhan Institute of Virology, again, part of the group. There's another here that we're going to look more into, the Institute of Pathogen Biology in Beijing. Among the aims listed, the application, these are the applications. This is what they told the government they were going to be doing and what the government was funding. They will sequence receptor binding domains, spike proteins, to identify viruses with the highest potential for spillover, which we will include in our experimental investigations. In another part of it, they say, we will use S protein sequence data, infectious clone technology. What do you think that means? Infectious clone technology. Huh. Does that sound like gain of function to you? It does to me. In vitro and in vivo infection experiments and analysis of receptor binding to test the hypothesis that percentage divergence thresholds in S protein sequences predict spillover potential. So they're trying to figure out, to be fair to them, look, we want to look at these viruses and see which one of them are dangerous. And it looks like they were going to be playing games with the viruses, replicating them, and managing them in a way to figure out which would be the most dangerous. How much were they getting? The cost for the first year, according to the documents Judicial Watch uncovered here, exclusive, 2019-2020, was $736,996. 2021, $712,000. So, and that number was the same through 2024. Thankfully, Trump shut it down. In July 2020, HHS wrote a letter to EcoHealth Alliance essentially shutting it down. We are concerned that the Wuhan Institute hasn't satisfied safety requirements under the award, and that the EcoHealth Alliance has not satisfied its obligations to monitor the activities of its subrecipient to ensure compliance. Therefore, effective in this letter, July 8th, 2020, NIH is suspending all activities. Why isn't there is there a criminal investigation going on? I mean, when you have a responsibility to make sure that taxpayer money is being spent as you are promising, is that fraud? There should be a criminal investigation of the use of taxpayer money in this improper way, according to the HHS, to fund this research. Specifically, the agency of Fauci, NIAID, had a total funding of $381,000 designated to be funded, but of course that was cut off. So I think initially only 75 was put out there. This is what the sort of money that they were, this is the sort of activity they were funding. The Wuhan Institute of Virology, for instance, also requested support, this is a quote, for in vitro experiments using pseudoviruses carrying the spike proteins or Lyme viruses in cell lines of different origins, binding affinity assays between the spike proteins and different cellular receptor molecules and humanized mice experiments. Now, we've told you separately how a lot of these humanized mice experiments results from obtaining the organs of babies or unborn human beings killed through abortion. I don't know how they got those organs, created those humanized mice in China, but we know how they do them here in the United States, at least until recently, with your tax dollars. In discussion of their research to date, the grant applicants wrote, in collaboration with Ralph Barrick at University of North Carolina, we used the SARS-CoV reverse genetic system to generate a chimeric virus. I think it's chimeric. It's one of those words you read but rarely hear said. How would you say it? Chimeric. Ah, you see, I never hear that word said. Chimeric. Chimeric. I think chimeric sounds fun, but chimeric, I'll go with chimeric. Thank you, Matt. Generate a chimeric virus with a mouse-adapted SARS-CoV backbone expressing SHC014 S protein with 10% sequence divergence with SARS-CoV-2. The chimera is replicated in human airway epithelium using the human ACE2 receptor to enter cells. Thus, SARS-CoVs with diverse variants of SL-CoV's S protein without deletions in the RBD can use human ACE2 as a receptor for cell entry. Emphasis in the original, that last sentence. Now, I want you to kind of go back and play what I said again and again and again. And ask yourself, is what Fitton's saying gain of function? Now, these documents are documents similar to these were released. So the Intercept talked about this stuff back in September. We had also gotten the documents. They got them out before we did. So as our lawsuit had produced these documents that the Intercept talked about, and they had experts look at this. And they said, this is gain of function. We will construct, how'd you pronounce it? Chimeric SARS-CoV using the WIV1 backbone. I think that's Wuhan Institute of Virology. And these S genes as done previously. They go on. Construction of chimeric SARS-CoV viruses, infectious clones with the S gene of novel SARS-CoV and the SARS-CoV WIV1 genome backbone using the reverse genetic system developed in our R01. How is that not gain of function? Maybe I'm just being dumb. But we're all become a little bit more expert in this area, haven't we? If at least those of us have been following it. And this indicates to me gain of function. But interestingly, later, in the section entitled P3CO Research, which is Potential Pandemic Pathogen Care and Oversight, SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV are subject to these guidelines, and as such, reverse genetic studies are subject to review. Importantly, we're not proposing to genetically manipulate SARS-CoV over the course of this proposal. However, we are proposing to genetically manipulate the full-length bat SARS-CoV WIV1 strain molecular clone during the course of the proposal, which is not a select agent, has not been shown to cause human infections, and has not been shown to be transmissible between humans. So they're pretending it's not gain of function while actually describing, at least to me, gain of function. So these are pretty extraordinary documents. They deserve worldwide attention. They should be followed up by prosecutors and investigators in Congress and the media and the world. Now, do I know this resulted in COVID-19? I don't. But reading this, it looks like it's in the same ballpark. I mean, heck, that's what they were worried about, a COVID-19 getting out. So we should be getting more documents. I think we have more documents coming in. But this is, again, the most important thing that's happened in world history in however how long, right? The coronavirus. And what has happened in terms of investigating how it came about and who have been maybe messing around with viruses in a way that could have generated in an artificial way this infection. Judicial Watch is doing this investigation. Do you think the Biden administration is seriously investigating Biden's business partners in China? Excuse me, the Biden family's business partners in China, the Chinese government? Of course not. Chinese government, they disappeared people and told everyone they're not cooperating. They're done with it. So frankly, it's going to be up to Judicial Watch to figure out at least what Fauci and his people knew and what the government knew about this. And it looks like they knew a lot. And here we are, nearly a full year after the coronavirus emerged, and only now are they giving us these documents. And they've been sitting on them. It's actually now 2 years, right? Yeah, it's 2 years. How quickly time flies when you're being oppressed. And they're now only giving them to us. This is transparency in the modern age. So when Fauci and the media say, you're attacking me, I represent science. This isn't science he's representing. He's representing a cover-up. He's a government bureaucrat who doesn't want stuff. His agency doesn't want stuff about their misconduct or mistakes. And maybe they were honest mistakes, but I don't think this is honest mistakes. They were told there was trouble, and they pretended there wasn't. And whether Fauci lied under oath, I think it was an open question. It's even more of an open question given these new documents. So I encourage you to go and read them. I mean, it may sound difficult to follow while I'm reading them, admittedly, but I'm reading them in a way to kind of highlight that this sounds like they're manipulating viruses that are pretty darn dangerous. And in China, I don't know about you, I don't trust the Chinese communists to think, well, the only reason to manipulate these types of viruses just to make sure we have vaccines ready. So more is coming. Stay tuned. So Judicial Watch is a national leader in the efforts to maintain and secure our elections, clean elections at least. And one of the ways we do that is by going after states that refuse to follow federal law, which requires states and localities to take reasonable steps to clean up the election rolls. Essentially what happens is if you don't vote, they're supposed to ask, why haven't you voted? And if you don't respond or vote within the next 2 general election cycles at the federal level, they're supposed to remove your name. That's one way of maintaining clean election rolls. We don't want old names on the rolls. People who've moved away or died, aren't eligible to vote in the jurisdiction, being still on the registration list. It's an opportunity for fraud. Dirty election rolls can mean dirty elections. And of course, the Justice Department is certainly under the Obama administration, frankly, wasn't terribly interested in doing anything under the Trump administration because the left largely ran the Justice Department on these issues. And we know where the Biden administration is going to fall. The Justice Department had zero interest in enforcing this law. So as a result, our voting lists have been filthy. And it was Judicial Watch who came in and filed the first private lawsuits to clean up election rolls. We did it in Indiana and Ohio. We settled it in Ohio. Indiana changed their law. And things got better in both states. And in fact, the settlement was upheld by the United States Supreme Court to the chagrin of the left, further confirming the process I laid out as being what is supposed to be done under law. And that resulted in a major lawsuit in California and Los Angeles County being settled with Judicial Watch. And they agreed as part of their settlement because their lists were dirty. They hadn't cleaned their list, best we could tell, in 20 years. LA County agreed to start removing names, up to 1.6 million names. They're in the middle of doing that now. We had a consent decree in Kentucky, a largely Republican-controlled state. They're removing at least 250,000 names. They said, oh yeah, you're right. We have lawsuits in Pennsylvania we filed. We had a lawsuit in Colorado we filed that was just approved by a judge to go forward. And we still have a lawsuit in North Carolina on this very issue. So we haven't slowed down in one bit. And in fact, we just speeded up again because we just sent warnings to 14 counties in 5 states to clean up their rolls or face federal lawsuits. So initially, when we began this type of litigation, you start looking at census data, you compare it to voter registration data, and you see that you have more people oftentimes you saw you had more people on the voting rolls than were living there and eligible to vote according to the census. And that was pretty good information in terms of giving us like a warning that, hey, there's something going on. They got more people on the rolls than are living there and eligible to vote. They're probably not doing their job in terms of cleaning them up. The census data isn't available yet this year, but there's other data that one could look at. And the data is material, registration material and information about their cleanup process that counties and states provide to the Federal Election Assistance Commission, which is a federal agency. So it's got to be correct. So we looked at these documents, we looked at this data and found that there were several counties, as I said, 14 counties in 5 states, that weren't doing their job. As we say, the letters detail how these states' own reported data show their counties removed absurdly low or an impossible number of inactive voter registrations under key provisions of the federal law, it's known as the National Voter Registration Act. And the letters threaten federal lawsuits unless the violations are corrected in a timely fashion. And you may want to know who the states are. The current states that we've warned are Arkansas, California, Illinois, New York, and Oregon. These are the numbers, or at least some of the numbers. In San Bernardino County, they have 1.294 million people on the rolls. And over the last 4 years, you know how many people they've removed for being inactive? Under this process I'm talking about? 14. Does that sound right to you? No. Sacramento County, California. Over 1 million people on the rolls. You know how many people they removed over the 4 years under this process? 0. Contra Costa County, California, 735,000 people on the rolls. You know how many people they removed from the rolls? Last 4 years. One person. Fresno, 500,000 people, well over 500,000 people, 573,000 people on the rolls. They've removed 2 names in the last 4 years. Stanislaus County, California, 356,000 voter registrations. 2 people over the last 4 years. Solano County, California, 338,000 people. 4 over the last 4 years. Brooklyn, New York, Kings County. So we're talking about New York City, all of the following here. 1.735 million people on the rolls. You know how many people they removed over the last 4 years? 0. Queens, 1.3 million. You know how many people they removed? 0. New York County, which is Manhattan, 1.2 million people there on the rolls. They've removed 2 people over the last 4 years, inactive voters. I want you to think about that. In all of Manhattan, this data that they gave the EAC, they're telling them that only 2 people have become inactive and removable over the last 4 years. What a mess. Nassau County, New York, and Long Island, 1 million people on the rolls, 0. Bronx, 867,000 people on the rolls, 1. Richmond County, New York. I didn't know where. I was like, where is Richmond County? It's Staten Island. 344,000 people, 0. Now going over to Oregon. So I want to do that New York. Let's do this New York count. That's 1, 2, 3. Wow. Based on my hand count here, all of New York City removed 3 people from the rolls in the last 4 years. Monotma County in Portland, which is kind of Portland, Oregon, they have 500,000 people, 571,000 people on the rolls. They removed 5 people over the last few years. And Lane County, Oregon, 275,000 people on the rolls, 2 people. So the total of these counties, number of voter registrations is 11,848,651. And those counties in California and New York City and Portland and nearby have only removed 33 of those names from the rolls. Bob Popper, who is our senior attorney, you've probably seen him on our YouTube channel. He's a great guy. He's testified to Congress. He's director of our efforts to clean up elections. He observed that about 10% of Americans move every year. Those counties should generate hundreds of thousands of canceled registrations. So we're not talking like an argument, should there be 2 versus 10? It's a question of should there be 2 versus 50,000? There's simply no way to comply with federal law while removing so few outdated registrations under its key provisions. And again, and as Popper noted, and as I noted in the beginning, these are not our numbers. These are federal numbers that these entities, these state and county entities, reported to the feds. They came directly from state reports to the Election Assistance Commission, a federal agency. Now, Popper knows what he's doing. He was formerly deputy chief of the voting section of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. So he used to litigate these cases for the United States. Now, we also sent letters threatening lawsuits against statewide election officials in Arkansas and Illinois on the ground that many counties in those states also had low numbers of statutory removals. So they have all these names on the list. People are obviously moving away, and the names are bad. They're ghost voters. They shouldn't be on the lists anymore, and they're not being removed. Now, hopefully, and I'm serious about this, they get our letter and they say, whoa, we'll press delete and the names will be removed. And you may laugh, but that's happened before. We did that in Pennsylvania. We have a lawsuit against certain counties in Pennsylvania. But we didn't sue Allegheny County because we gave them this notice letter that I'm talking about. And they said, oops, we're sorry. And they removed 69,000 names completely. So hopefully they do that and we don't have to sue. But we have to, if they don't do what we want them to do, we will sue. As I said, this isn't idle threat making. We've sued repeatedly. And why is this important? Well, it's important because you want your voting rolls to be clean. But it's doubly important because of, I think, the terrible policy of widespread and massive vote by mail. You're relying on these lists to mail out votes, to mail out ballots. Now, some of these lists, I don't know if the lists included, sometimes the ballots are limited to people who are only active voters. But I tell you, if you're not cleaning up inactive voters, their active voter lists are similarly bad in terms of having ineligible voters. You've got to have a kind of a system in place to make sure that you're able to remove people once they move away. And when you're just mailing everything, who knows who's getting these ballots if people have moved away? And if you don't have the security procedures in place, which virtually no vote by mail process does, in my views, as adequately, you're inviting voter fraud. That's why vote by mail is frowned upon by experts who know about voter fraud. Now, I know we're being told, oh, don't worry about it anymore. It's because the left likes it. So we're not allowed to talk about what we've been saying for the last 30 years on vote by mail, how it's a riskier way of voting in terms of providing more opportunities for voter fraud and voter intimidation. And if the lists are dirty, it's doubly bad. So more is coming. There are other states that got problems. I don't know if we're going to threaten to sue them, but we're going to tell them there are problems. So as Congress sits on its thumbs, or frankly just wants to undermine election integrity issues, as the Justice Department is suing states like Georgia and Texas for trying to strengthen election integrity, Judicial Watch is stepping up to try to make the next elections cleaner. I'm hoping we get names removed immediately. So hopefully, let's the material's available on our website. And if you're curious, you can ask your local county officials under Section 8 of the NVRA. You can look it up, National Voter Registration Act. You as a citizen have a right to ask for records about how they're maintaining the list. You can ask them. Do it respectfully and just do it. They're going to hate that I told you can do it yourself, but that's the law. So I'm ticked, but I'm also glad that Judicial Watch is doing this. And I get frustrated because I know if we weren't doing it, it wouldn't be done. It wouldn't be done. Our election systems are under attack. And this is an important action to at least maintain some integrity in our systems that are so under attack right now by the extremist left that want to undermine vote security, ballot security, election security in a way that makes it easier to steal votes and steal elections. Virginia, Loudoun County, and the state generally was aflame because of CRT and extremist transgender activism that raised safety concerns about the schools, and the CRT raised objections by parents who didn't want their kids being called racist or being told America is the worst place since Nazi Germany. Americans and parents in Loudoun County and frankly all over the country don't want politics in the school, and they don't want commie politics in the school, if I could be blunt. This repackaged Marxism, you call it whatever you want, diversity, equity training, cultural responsive training, anti-racism, it's all code. It's not even code. It's just other names for critical race theory and repackaged Marxism. And Judicial Watch got a boatload of documents from Montgomery County. Now, Montgomery County is the county just northwest of Washington, D.C. So, you know, across the river to the west is Virginia, and to the north and the west and the east is, and I guess south, is Maryland. That goes around the diamond there. I call it, the capital is shaped like a diamond, at least part of it. And so immediately north is Montgomery County, which, you know, Loudoun County is one of the richest counties in the country because of its proximity to Washington, D.C. and the seat of government. And Montgomery County is similarly prosperous. But it's controlled by the left, which is fine. I mean, that's the way politics is locally here. But, you know, they can't, in my view, abuse the rule of law, abuse our children with this racist claptrap. And we've got these really outrageous documents talking about restorative justice and psychoeducation, which is more about critical race theory and getting kids to be turned into Marxists than anything else. And I'll read you some of the materials that we got. We received 2 sets of new records related to the teaching critical race theory in Montgomery County Public Schools, which is immediately to the north of D.C., but it's also the biggest county school district in the state of Maryland. So it's a big school district. So the headline is there's this far left book called Anti-Racist Baby. It's critical race theory laden material. And they push the book to be given to ages baby to age 3. So CRT is objectionable for adults, in my view. Certainly, you know, when we see the military being subjected to the CRT propaganda. Parents are outraged their kids, school-age kids, are being subjected to it. But here we have government documents where they're pushing this Marxist claptrap on babies and toddlers. And it's in the language of the documents. And I'm going to read some of this material because I don't trust you to read it. So I'm just going to read it for you because I know the way life is. You want to hear it read for you. That's a good way to educate. So there's this educational let's see. So the Associate Superintendent for the Office of Shared Accountability. I mean, if that doesn't tell you there's trouble afoot, I don't know what does. I mean, where do they come up with these titles and organizational subcomponents for school districts? Shared accountability. I don't even know what that means. I keep on looking at my colleague Troy here, and he's shaking his, you know, he's like, I don't know what it means. So she's advising principals about all of these various trainings, including a website for staff, students, and families that highlights ongoing professional learning opportunities for the virtual opening of schools. This is in August of last year. And of course, one of the big deals is equity, which, as I've told you, is that's not equality. Equity is essentially Marxist. It means everyone must have the same stuff. And if anyone's more successful than someone else, that person has to have material taken away from them and given to the other person. And in the school environment, that typically means that students who are successful and programs that are geared to helping children succeed are to be eliminated. So no one has access to special enrichment. Everyone's equal in outcome, which is the heart of communism. And this is what she says. The professional learning opportunities are grounded in equity and social emotional learning. Now, we could go on, I guess, I could do another 2 or 3 more segments on social emotional learning, but I have a feeling to say it is to condemn it, isn't it? So I probably don't need to explain it to you. To ensure that equitable environments are established in the virtual and traditional learning spaces. Professional learning opportunities will be updated throughout the year, so please check back. Including in this is there's an instructional video for teachers on COVID-19/social justice. You can imagine where this is going, in which the presenter first instructs teachers how to set up a Zoom classes for students and how to make sure the kids don't say what they're hearing, because that's dangerous, as you know. And this is what they say. In a slide entitled COVID-19 and Social Justice Surrounding Racism, this is the response that's scripted for teachers. We are currently living through a dual pandemic with COVID-19 and the systemic and structural racism occurring worldwide. Did you know that systemic racism is a pandemic? Well, that's what the left is teaching your children. A pandemic is defined by an outbreak of a disease. This is what they think of their opposition. Diseased, that occurs over a wide geographic area and affects an exceptionally high proportion of the population. As you can see from this slide featuring a Black Lives Matter protest poster, both are affecting lives of people in our community and around the world, part of which we will discuss today. Will surround facts about COVID-19 and the social justice movement in our country. How is that not politics? How is that not Marxist politics? And this is what I love. They have their little politicos, their little comrades ready to step in if a teacher gets out of line or isn't with the program. Please be available to coach and or co-teach with a staff member that may not be at a place on their anti-racism journey to effectively teach that section of the lesson. So they don't want anyone who hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid teaching the kids. Again, there's a slide. Some facts about racism and social justice contains a link. Again, there's more material here, more PowerPoint material for, quote, parents. Some facts about racism and social justice contains a link to a video called Anti-Racist Baby, which is based on a book written by Imran X. Kendi, who is a very controversial CRT promoter. Although they say, of course, no such thing as CRT. So just so you know, I suspect it's just going to be a matter of weeks before videos that allege that CRT is in the schools get taken down, and other posts get taken down by big tech enforcing the communist suppression of free speech in this country. So, you know, I'm going to say it. It's in the schools. We've got the documents, but that's not going to stop them from suppressing the truth. And as I said earlier, the teacher's notes advises teachers that Anti-Racist Baby book introduces youngest readers to the concept and power of anti-racism and says it's the perfect gift for ages baby to age 3. So they're pushing this garbage on children. Now, the left says, how could you be against being anti-racist? Because, again, it's a term of art. It's like Antifa, anti-fascist. They think everyone who doesn't share their political values is racist. Or in the case of Antifa, everyone who doesn't share their communist political values is fascist. So when you hear leftists talk about anti-racism, they're talking about revolution. They're talking about America being foundationally corrupted by racism and the system needs to be overturned. But they want to teach that to babies. I don't know. My wife and I raised a few babies. I don't think they would have understood this, but you know, it shows you how crazy the left is that they think babies are going to be reading this anti-racist baby book. I don't know, maybe some parents would start reading it to them out loud. I don't know. Turning them into red diaper babies, as they used to be called. A slide titled Secondary, a brief anti-racism glossary, notes systems of oppression identifies inequity by calling attention to the historical and organized patterns of mistreatment. In the United States, systems of oppression, like systemic racism, are woven into the very foundations of American culture, society, and laws. That's what they think of your country. And of course, they say they can't opt out of the lessons. They don't want the students not to be taught this brainwashing Marxist theory. Again, COVID-19 and social justice. There's another PowerPoint presentation geared at 3rd through 5th graders, babies. I consider them to be babies. I have a pretty expansive view of that word. People in African American and Latinx communities. Latinx communities. I know a lot of Hispanics who are offended by that. But the left doesn't care. They just make up terms to separate and segregate people. Have been more likely to get sick from COVID-19 because of how racism and unfairness impacts their lives. What is the science behind that? There's no science behind that. Even giving, and I don't necessarily give this, but let's say that COVID disproportionately impacts a minority community. Is that because of racism? What's the science behind that? It's pseudoscience. Of course, it's Marxist science. High school psychoeducational lesson. Now, I didn't go through to see what even psychoeducational meant. But like I said, I don't need to hear anything other than the word psychoeducational to know that I oppose it. We want our children to learn how to read, write, reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? And to communicate. And that comes with the reading and writing, in my view. But the left wants to shape your child's moral and cultural outlooks to fit their agenda as opposed to the parents' agenda. So this high school lesson for psychoeducational purposes is a link. They provide a link to educator and caregiver learning guide from Disrupt Text. Disrupt Text sounds like that's communist revolutionary language. For the book titled, again, Anti-Racist Baby. In the book, the authors note, to white caregivers, and capitalized white like the South Africans would do, racism. Racism is a problem that was invented by white people. Again, capital W, segregationist, apartheid-style language. And it is the work of white people to dismantle it, capital W. The authors add that it is the responsibility of white caregivers to study whiteness. This is racism, and this is not, what they're doing here is obviously an abuse of children, but it is unlawful in the sense that our laws have 50 years of structure set up to prevent racist, segregationist, discriminatory, hostile atmosphere based on race activities from taking place in our schools. And they're upending all of that. Indigenous, Black, and people of color are not minorities, but people of the global majority, PGM. Again, they capitalize Black. That's the new left communist thing to do. And it's racist. go on and on. I just want to end with this. Well, I've got three more things to say, because this stuff really gets me going too. There's a draft activity included in this records called, for an assignment titled Personal Identity Character Sketch. This is really evil. In which students were told to, quote, focus on the intersectionality of your culture and another way you identify yourself, your race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, class, or other identity factor not listed here. So this is what they do, is they try to take personal identifying information about children and misuse it. First of all, kind of pressuring them into potentially identifying as things they necessarily don't identify as. So there's this kind of that agenda there. But secondly, using whatever they identify as, very personal to them, as a way to leverage a change in their thinking on political issues. So the Marxists, they initially focused on class. Now they use all sorts of other categories to generate support and energy for the revolution. And that's what they're doing here. By gaining private information from children and using it against them. I mean, I encourage, as soon as I said it, you know what image popped into my mind? Winston in Big Brother, 1984. It's not Big Brother, but where the character, the protagonist, had personal information used against him to brainwash him for the totalitarian regime of the antagonist. And of course, the left is no fun. So they talk about going to cultural events celebrating diversity, but that's not good enough, because those food festivals where you might actually, taste food you never tasted before from another culture, that's not sufficient, because the communists need you to do more. Although these events have the potential to bring people together across differences, they do not have the potential to address injustices such as racism, sexism, classism, or homophobia. So don't go to those food festivals anymore, kids. You may think you're learning about other cultures, but unless there is an extremist agenda attached to it, avoid it. Again, straight out of, this is like material you would read kind of being parodied in the Soviet bloc from the dissident movement. This is, I see images of all these dissident novels and books I read. And this is the language. This is what was killing people. Proponents of this. This is what was killing people in the Soviet bloc and the communist blocs, and still is in China, for instance. Even charitable giving is frowned upon. Now you're hitting close to home with Judicial Watch, right? Charitable giving to such organizations as Amnesty International is a route people often choose that will ease their own conscience, but don't want to associate in a deeper way with a particular cause. Even volunteerism is frowned upon. Critical of savior syndrome, which it defines as when wealthy kids are sent into poor neighborhoods to do service learning, but never discuss how the relative wealth is connected with the relative poverty of people inhabiting those neighborhoods. So there you have it. If these kids aren't attacked for, quote, they're privileged and abused by the teachers who are supposed to be keeping them safe from this sort of political ideological attack, that's what they object to. This is what they're doing in Montgomery County, one of the most wealthy, significant, highly educated counties in the world. This is what's being taught. So I want you to keep this in mind when you're told there's no such thing as CRT. That's just the legal movement in the academy. The purpose of it being taught in colleges and universities was so that it could be pursued in circumstances like this, and I have the proof it's being pursued. And we've got tons of other material here. Judicial Watch is sued. I told you about the Loudoun County documents, which had similar material last week. Again, Montgomery County, we had previous documents, anti-racist system audit. They had segregated affinity spaces up in Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, they talk about emphasizing collectivism over individualism for teachers. And Lord help you if you object to this. We're representing a coach, Mike Flynn, Dedham High School in Massachusetts. He was fired from the football coach position because he objected to his daughter being taught in her middle school the CRT, Black Lives Matter propaganda. I mean, that whole system was so obsessed with the issue, they wanted to impose it on the football team because they thought the coach wasn't a team player in that regard. So they fired him for exercising his rights as a citizen and a parent to object. And we have a lawsuit on his behalf, a civil rights lawsuit. So we're not just trying to get the documents out and exposing what CRT is about. And I tell you, we are overwhelmed with parents seeking our assistance in getting these school districts to fess up and give us the documents like we're able to get here. We're happy to help where we can. So I encourage you to reach out to us if you're running into issues in your locality. Well, I wish you Merry Christmas on behalf of my family and my colleagues here at Judicial Watch. I hope you and yours have a wonderful holiday. And I hope you keep Judicial Watch in mind as you consider year-end gifts to your church, and I know your charities and your colleges and universities, whoever you give money to at the end of the year. I hope Judicial Watch is on the list. I know many of you are already supporting Judicial Watch, but this is another opportunity, at least for me, to thank you for your past support of Judicial Watch and encourage you to join our cause and join our movement. Judicial Watch is able to do something that few others here in the United States are able to do, which is to hold the government accountable to the rule of law on behalf of you and other American citizens. And it's a unique organization, not only here in the United States, but across the world. So if you like what Judicial Watch is doing, I encourage you to support our work. And in the meantime, again, I wish you and yours a wonderful and Merry Christmas.